A lonely heir comes across his mother's coffin at an open casket wake and sees a little girl praying at the foot of the body. But when he discovers who sent her, he's shocked. The sound of Michael Anderson's footsteps echoed through the silent halls of the Eternal Rest funeral home. Each step felt heavier than the last, as though he carried not just his 25 years, but the weight of the entire world on his shoulders. The clock on the wall read 3:43 p.m. and the fall sun filtered lazily through the tall windows, casting elongated shadows on the floorless marble floor. He paused for a moment, adjusting the black tie that seemed to choke him. His hands trembled slightly. There was no way to rehearse for this moment. How could anyone prepare for their own mother's wake? Elizabeth Anderson, 40 years old, taken by a cruel fate in the form of twisted metal on a wet highway. The soft murmur of voices led him to the main room. The cloying sweet scent of funeral flowers hit him like a wave, making his stomach churn. The room was filled with people, some faces familiar, others not, all united by the same expression of restrained grief. Aunts he hadn't seen in years dabbed discreet tears with lace handkerchiefs. Distant cousins whispered in corners, casting sideways glances in his direction. Elizabeth's co-workers stood in respectful silence, like statues in their dark suits and dresses. Michael walked slowly down the center aisle, feeling the weight of every stare upon him. He was the only child, the man of the family now. Each step toward the open casket was a small battle against the reality he refused to accept. Elizabeth's serene face, skillfully made up by professionals, looked like a wax mask, a cruel imitation of the vibrant woman who had been his mother. And then it happened. Amid the sea of adults dressed in black, a flash of sky blue caught his eye. A small girl, no more than 5, wearing a delicate blue dress that stood out starkly in the somber environment. Her light brown hair was gathered into 2 perfect braids, and she moved with a determination surprising for someone so young. Michael watched paralyzed as the small figure approached the casket. With a grace beyond her years, the child knelt, her little hands clasped in prayer. Her lips moved silently, forming words he couldn't hear. Time seemed to slow, each second stretching like honey dripping from a spoon. Then, with a deliberate gesture, she took something from a hidden pocket in her dress, a single white daisy, perfectly preserved. Michael felt his heart skip a beat. White daisies, Elizabeth's favorite flowers. How many times had he seen his mother in the garden, tenderly caring for her daisies, speaking to them as if they were old friends. The girl placed the flower with such care it seemed like a sacred ritual. For a moment, she remained there, motionless, a little blue statue in a sea of black. Michael felt an inexplicable urge to reach out to her, to find out who this mysterious child was, who seemed to know his mother's preferences so well. His feet began to move before his brain even processed the decision. But the moment he took the first step toward her, the girl rose with the same grace with which she had knelt. Like an ethereal spirit, she slipped among the attendees, her blue dress swallowed up by the crowd dressed in black. "Wait!" Michael wanted to shout, but the words lodged in his throat. In seconds, she was gone completely, as though she had never existed. Only the white daisy, resting delicately on Elizabeth's folded hands, proved she wasn't just a hallucination induced by grief. That was when he noticed his grandfather, William Anderson, standing by one of the room's ornate columns. At 60, William still cut an imposing figure, but something in his expression made Michael shiver. His eyes, normally sharp and alert, were clouded by a mix of emotions Michael couldn't decipher. Sadness was there, of course. He was grieving his only daughter, but there was something else, something deeper and more unsettling, like a heavy secret he was tired of bearing. Their eyes met briefly, and Michael had the disconcerting impression that his grandfather knew exactly who the mysterious girl in blue was. But before he could approach to ask, William looked away, his expression shutting down like a locked door. The white daisy remained there, a silent and accusatory presence keeping its own secrets. Michael stood beside the casket, his gaze shifting between that solitary flower and the spot where the little girl had disappeared. A certainty began to form in his mind. There was far more to this story than a simple tribute from an unknown child. The mystery of the girl in blue and her white daisy would be just the first thread in a much larger web, about to unravel and forever change what Michael thought he knew about his family. The week following the funeral passed as a hazy blur for Michael. The days dragged on in an endless succession of formalities, paperwork, and condolence visits. The image of the mysterious girl in blue still haunted him, appearing in his thoughts at the most unexpected times. On the morning of the 10th day after the funeral, the doorbell rang precisely at 9 o'clock. Michael, who had barely slept, found George Williams standing on his doorstep. The family attorney looked even more formal than usual in his impeccable grey suit, his worn leather briefcase contrasting with his meticulous appearance. "Michael," George greeted him with a solemn nod, "may I come in? We have something important to discuss." Michael's home office, normally his sanctuary, felt strangely claustrophobic as George settled into the leather armchair. The lawyer cleared his throat, adjusting the gold-framed glasses on his nose before opening his briefcase. "Your mother entrusted this to me," he said, removing a cream-colored envelope sealed with red wax, "with specific instructions to give it to you 10 days after her passing." Michael eyed the envelope with a mix of apprehension and curiosity. Elizabeth's elegant handwriting was unmistakable, his name written in blue ink, each letter perfectly formed. His hands trembled slightly as he broke the seal. "I'll excuse myself," George said, rising to his feet. "The contents are personal. I'll be available whenever you need to discuss whatever is inside." Alone, Michael carefully unfolded the pages. The paper carried the gentle perfume his mother always wore, as though she were there, present in every word. "My dear Michael, if you're reading this, it means I couldn't find the courage to tell you in person what I discovered. There are truths in our family that have remained buried for far too long, secrets that have weighed on my heart like lead these past years. You have an aunt, Michael, a half-sister to be precise. Her name is Grace. She's 30, and she's the most extraordinary person I've ever met. She's your grandfather William's daughter with Sarah Matthews, who once worked in our home as a housekeeper many years ago. I found out about Grace 5 years ago, purely by chance. A fortuitous meeting at a cafe, a striking resemblance to old photos of Sarah, and then the pieces began to fit together. At first I was shocked, then furious with Dad for hiding this from us for so long. But the anger gave way to curiosity, and curiosity led me to the most profound connection I've ever experienced. Grace is a pediatric nurse, Michael. She has a huge heart and a strength that leaves me speechless. She has a daughter, Emma, your cousin. She's an adorable 5-year-old you're sure to love as soon as you meet her. I'm not telling you this because of inheritance or money. God knows Grace never asked for any of that. I'm telling you because they are family, our family, and because I promised myself I wouldn't let this secret die with me the way it nearly died with Sarah." Michael had to stop reading, tears blurring his vision. The girl at the wake, Emma. It was all starting to make sense. He took several deep breaths before continuing. "Over the last 5 years, I've spent as much time as possible with them. Discreet get-togethers, hidden lunches, stolen moments that became the most precious of my life. Grace taught me about forgiveness in a way I never thought possible. Emma, well, she stole my heart from the very first smile. I know this is a lot to process. My son, I know you must be wondering why I kept this a secret for so long. The truth is, I was afraid. Afraid of the family's reaction. Afraid of hurting Grace by exposing her before she was ready. Afraid of losing the precious connection we'd built so carefully. But now I need you to be strong. I need you to do what I couldn't. Bring them into the light. Unite our family. Protect them, Michael. They will need you. In my office, in the second drawer of my desk, there's a journal. It has everything. How I found Grace, our journey together, the struggles and the joys. Read it, understand, and then, when you're ready, look for them. With all my love, 37. Mom. Michael remained motionless for several minutes after finishing the letter, the pages trembling slightly in his hands. The morning sun had shifted, creating new patterns of light on the carpet by the time he finally stood up. The walk to Elizabeth's office felt endless. The house was silent, except for the ticking of the old grandfather clock, a sound his mother had always found irritating, yet refused to silence. claiming it gave the home its life. The office looked exactly as she'd left it. Books meticulously arranged on mahogany shelves, the old typewriter in its place of honor, framed photographs capturing moments of joy, moments that now felt like they belonged to another life. The second drawer of the desk opened with a soft creak. The journal was there, bound in dark blue leather, its pages yellowed at the edges. Michael recognized it. He'd often seen his mother writing in it on Sunday afternoons, always with a cup of tea beside her. He sat in her chair, it still held her scent, and opened the journal with reverence. March 15th, 2019. Today I saw a ghost. Not a real ghost, of course, but something just as unsettling. I was at Margot's cafe when I saw her, a young woman not more than 30 with the same eyes as Sarah Matthews, the same gentle smile, the same tilt of the head when she's deep in thought. At first, I thought I was imagining it, that exhaustion was making me see similarities where none existed. But then she laughed, and it was like stepping back in time. Sarah Matthews, our housekeeper for so many years, the woman who practically raised me after my mother died. Sarah, who disappeared so abruptly when I was 15, leaving only a note of apology and a void that was never truly filled. I followed the young woman discreetly. Found out she works at St. Mary's Hospital as a nurse. Her name is Grace Matthews. My God, could it be? All these years, all these unanswered questions, I need to know more. The next pages detailed Elizabeth's meticulous investigation, newspaper clippings, hospital records, old photographs. She had gathered every piece of information like a determined detective. March 22nd, 2019. I confronted Dad today. It wasn't my intention. I've always prided myself on my self-control. But after a week of investigating, after confirming Grace really is Sarah's daughter, something inside me snapped. He denied it at first, of course, tried to dismiss me as though I were still a child imagining things. But when I mentioned dates, pointed out the undeniable resemblance, William Anderson, the great patriarch, crumbled before my eyes. It was a moment of weakness, he said, as though that explained everything. She was light in a very dark time. Mom had been gone for 2 years when it began. Sarah, always there, always kind, always comforting. One thing led to another. And then, when she told him she was pregnant, he panicked. Offered money, lots of money, for her to disappear. Sarah refused the money but left anyway, taking not just her unborn baby but also all those years of dedication to our family. I can't stop thinking about how she must have felt. Sarah, who cared for me like I was her own, forced to leave to protect her real daughter. The irony is devastating. Michael had to stop again, his emotions a swirling torrent. Images of Sarah Matthews began to surface in his memory, fragmented impressions of a gentle smile and the chocolate chip cookies she used to bake on rainy afternoons. April 10th, 2019. I finally mustered the courage to approach Grace, chose a moment when she was alone at the hospital's cafe. My hands were shaking so badly I nearly spilled my coffee. "Are you Sarah Matthews' daughter?" I asked bluntly. Her expression changed instantly. Mistrust, fear, recognition. "Who are you?" she asked, her voice steady despite the visible tremor in her hands. "My name is Elizabeth Anderson. Sarah worked for my family for many years." The silence that followed seemed to hold the weight of 3 decades of secrets. Grace studied me with those eyes, Sarah's eyes, before saying quietly, "She talked about you a lot. We talked for hours." Grace told me about her childhood, difficult but happy. Sarah worked 2 jobs to support them, never accepting a cent from William. She always taught Grace to be proud of who she was, to never feel lesser because of her background. Mom never badmouthed him, Grace told me, and there was a dignity in her words that took my breath away. She said some people aren't ready for a certain kind of love, and that was sadder for them than it was for us. When we said goodbye, both of us had tears in our eyes. Grace has a daughter, Emma, 5 years old, born with a heart condition that requires constant care. Sarah died 6 months ago, a sudden aneurysm. There was no time for goodbyes. I have a sister, a niece, a family I knew nothing about until now, and a new purpose, to do whatever it takes to bring them back into our lives. The journal went on, page after page of secret encounters, shared moments, small victories, and constant fears of discovery. Elizabeth documented everything, the first words she exchanged with Emma, the hidden lunches, the deep conversations with Grace about life, loss, and forgiveness. Michael closed the journal, his mind a whirlwind of emotions. The little girl in blue at the wake, Emma, her presence now carried an even heavier weight. She wasn't just a mysterious child paying her respects, she was his cousin, saying goodbye to the aunt who had become a second mother over the past 5 years. The sun was setting by the time he rose from the chair, the journal clutched in his hands. Elizabeth's final words echoed in his mind, "Unite our family. Protect them." Now he understood the enigmatic look on his grandfather's face at the wake. It wasn't just sadness in his eyes. It was guilt, regret, and perhaps, at long last, the desire for redemption. Michael knew what he had to do. His mother's legacy, Elizabeth's last wish, was crystal clear. It was time to bring Grace and Emma into the light, to right 3 decades of secrets and silence. Time to finish what Elizabeth had started. The discovery of the journal had left Michael emotionally spent, yet something kept him from leaving Elizabeth's office. His gaze roamed the familiar space, seeing it now through a new lens. Every object, every detail seemed to hold potential secrets. His mother had always been meticulous. If she'd kept a secret journal, what else might be hidden? His feet carried him instinctively to the office closet. It was small, but impeccably organized, with shelves from floor to ceiling. Elizabeth stored her most important files there, arranged in folders labeled with her precise handwriting. Michael knew this closet well, or at least he thought he did. That was when he noticed something out of place. One of the baseboards was slightly loose, almost imperceptible unless you looked very closely. Kneeling down, Michael pressed gently on the wood, feeling it give under his fingers. Carefully, he removed the board, revealing a hidden compartment. There, shielded from dust and time, lay an old shoebox, carefully preserved. His heart raced when he recognized the faded logo. It was from his mother's favorite store, where she used to buy the elegant shoes she loved. With trembling hands, Michael pulled the box out of its hiding place. Sitting on the closet floor, he removed the lid. The first item made his breath catch, a photograph. Elizabeth and Emma were in the kitchen, both covered in flour, laughing as they made what looked like cupcakes. His mother's face radiated a joy he hadn't seen in years. Emma, in her tiny apron, had the same radiant smile he had glimpsed briefly at the wake. One by one, the photos told the story of a parallel life his mother had built over the past 5 years. There were pictures of discreet afternoon coffees, Elizabeth and Grace sitting close, heads tilted in intimate conversation. One showed a small birthday celebration, a single candle on a cupcake, Emma blowing it out with determination while Elizabeth and Grace applauded. Among the more recent photos, an older sepia-toned picture caught his eye. A young woman smiled at the camera, wearing a simple yet elegant uniform, Sarah Matthews. Michael recognized her instantly, the same gentle smile he saw in Grace in the newer photos, the same graceful tilt of the head. This picture had likely been taken in the mansion's gardens more than 30 years ago. Beneath the photographs lay a collection of notes and cards, written in a child's uneven and adorable handwriting. "For my special aunt," read one, decorated with colorful hearts and hand-drawn flowers. "Thank you for the chocolate cupcakes. You make the best in the world. Love, Emma." Another note had a small pressed daisy folded inside. "I picked this at school because I know you love daisies. Love you, Aunt Liz." Small gifts, carefully preserved, told the story of a relationship built in stolen moments. A handmade beaded bracelet, a framed drawing of 3 stick figures labeled "Me, Mommy, and Aunt Liz." A tiny ceramic angel inscribed with "For my guardian angel" on the base. Michael found an envelope containing receipts for gifts, children's books, art supplies, small toys, all sent discreetly to an address he didn't recognize. His mother had documented every interaction, every shared moment, as though she feared these precious pieces of her life might one day be lost. At the bottom of the box, he found a small album dedicated entirely to Emma. Photos captured her growth, her first day of school, ballet recitals, moments at the park. Elizabeth had been there for each milestone, though always quietly, always in the shadows. The last photo in the album made his heart tighten. It was recent, probably taken just a few weeks before the accident. Elizabeth, Grace, and Emma were sitting on a park bench, the sunset painting the sky behind them in shades of pink and gold. They weren't posing. Someone had caught a spontaneous moment of shared laughter. On the back of the photo, in Elizabeth's handwriting, were the simple words, "My complete family." Sitting there on the closet floor, surrounded by evidence of a secret life his mother had led in the margins of the one he knew, Michael was overwhelmed by understanding. His mother hadn't just discovered a lost family, she had dedicated herself to building bridges, filling voids, weaving connections in the silence imposed by decades of secrets. Elizabeth had become for Emma the grandmother Sarah never could be, for Grace the sister that fate had long denied her. Each photo, each note, each tiny gift told the story of a love that refused to stay hidden, even though it couldn't fully exist in the daylight. Michael thought about all those Sundays when his mother mentioned having important commitments, the afternoon she disappeared to take care of matters, the mysterious smiles that sometimes lit her face when she checked her phone. She had balanced two lives with grace and determination, bearing the weight of secrets not out of shame or fear, but out of love and protection. Gently, he began returning each item to the box, treating each object as the sacred relic it was. These weren't just memories, they were pieces of a puzzle his mother had started to assemble, a legacy of love now left to him to continue. The last of the daylight faded when Michael finally closed the box and placed it back in its hiding spot. His heart felt heavy with his newly acquired knowledge, but also strangely light. Amid the pain of loss, he had found a purpose to carry on his mother's work, to bring into the open what she had so lovingly nurtured in secret for so long. The hidden memories in Elizabeth's closet were not just recollections of a secret past. They were a map pointing to the future, a path she had begun to clear and now trusted her son to finish. Michael knew he couldn't let the fear and prejudices that had kept his family divided continue to cast Grace and Emma into the shadows. It was time to honor his mother's final wish, to reunite the pieces of this fractured family and finally bring to light what love had long since made true. St. Mary's Hospital stood tall against the morning sky, its windows reflecting the light of the rising sun. Michael remained in his car for several minutes, his hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles whitened. In the passenger seat, Elizabeth's journal and some of the photos he'd found in the hidden box seemed to burn with their significance. After a sleepless night going over the journal's contents, he knew Grace would be working the morning shift in the pediatric ward. Elizabeth had documented her half-sister's schedule meticulously, always arranging their casual meetings with surgical precision. "You can do this," he muttered to himself, finally opening the car door. The cool morning air hit him like a slap, helping to clear his thoughts. Wearing a navy blue suit, the same one he'd worn at the wake, Michael walked across the parking lot and into the main entrance. The reception area was bustling, typical for a hospital in the morning. An elderly lady gave him a gentle smile as she waited in line for information. When it was finally his turn, Michael hesitated momentarily. "Good morning, I'm looking for Nurse Grace Matthews," he said, his voice steadier than he'd expected. The receptionist typed something into her computer. "She's on the 4th floor, pediatric wing. May I ask what this is regarding?" "It's personal. I'm Michael Anderson, Elizabeth Anderson's son." Something about the name made the receptionist look at him more closely. "Oh," was all she said, then handed him a visitor's badge. The elevator ride felt agonizingly slow. Michael watched as the floor numbers lit up one by one, his heart pounding harder with each passing level. When the doors finally opened on the 4th floor, he was greeted by a completely different world. The walls were decorated with colorful artwork and cheerful murals of animals. Children's laughter echoed through the corridors, mixing with the soft hum of conversation and medical monitors. And then he saw her. Grace was turned away from him, reviewing a chart while talking to a colleague. Her brown hair was pulled back in a practical bun, and her light blue scrubs featured little teddy bears. Even from behind, her resemblance to Sarah was remarkable. As though sensing his presence, Grace turned around. Her eyes, Sarah's gentle eyes, locked onto his, and for a moment time seemed to freeze. Michael watched recognition wash over her face, followed quickly by a swirl of emotions. Surprise, fear, sorrow. "Grace," he said softly, taking a step toward her. She instinctively stepped back, her hand gripping the chart. "Michael," she whispered. Turning to her colleague, she said something quietly, then motioned for him to follow her. Grace led him to a small, empty break room. The walls were painted a soothing, pale green, and a coffee machine hummed softly in the corner. She shut the door behind them, finally turning to face him fully. I'm sorry for your loss," she began, her voice trembling slightly. "Elizabeth was my mother," Michael finished gently, "and your sister." Grace visibly paled, her fingers instinctively reaching for a nearby chair. "She told you," she said, not a question. "Through a letter," Michael explained, taking an envelope from his pocket. "Then I found her journal and a box." Grace sank into the chair, as though her legs could no longer support her. Michael took the seat across from her, maintaining a respectful distance. "We never intended to deceive you," Grace began, her voice gathering strength. "Elizabeth, she came into our lives like an angel, exactly when we needed one most." Her hands were clasped in her lap, a gesture Michael recognized. Elizabeth did the same when she was nervous. Mom, Sarah, had just passed away. It was so sudden, an aneurysm. One moment she was fine, and the next, her voice broke. "Emma had just been diagnosed with her heart condition," Grace went on, her voice thick with emotion. "I was lost, completely lost. Then one day, Elizabeth showed up here in this very hospital. She recognized me, said I was the spitting image of my mother." Michael watched as Grace stood up and walked to the window. The morning light softened her features, highlighting her resemblance to the old photo of Sarah. "At first I was scared," Grace continued. "Sarah always protected us from the Andersons, never wanted us tangled in, well, your world. But Elizabeth was different. She had your mom's eyes, you know. Not physically, but the same look of kindness, of understanding." Grace turned back to face him, unshed tears glistening in her eyes. "She didn't offer money, never tried to buy our silence or affection. She was just there. She'd show up with coffee when I had a night shift, bring books for Emma, listen to my stories about Mom for hours. When she learned about Emma's condition," Grace continued, her tone softening at the mention of her daughter, "Elizabeth moved mountains behind the scenes. We never asked, never even knew at first, but she made sure Emma got access to the best specialists, the most advanced treatments, always discreet, always respectful of our privacy and dignity." Michael thought of the photos he had found, afternoons filled with baking and laughter. "Emma seems like an extraordinary kid," he said gently. A genuine smile lit Grace's face for the first time. "She is strong like Sarah, stubborn like—" She paused. "Like William, I guess. Elizabeth adored her. They had a special bond from day one." "It was her at the wake, wasn't it?" Michael asked, though he already knew the answer. "In the blue dress, holding the daisy?" Grace nodded, tears finally escaping. "Elizabeth loved daisies. Emma always picked some at school for her. When we heard about the accident, Emma insisted on going to the funeral. I tried to argue it might be risky, that it would raise questions, but she wouldn't back down. 'Aunt Liz needs her special flower,' she said." Michael felt his own tears begin to fall. "It must have been so hard for you both, not being able to mourn openly." "It was like losing Mom all over again," Grace admitted, voice thick with emotion. "Sarah taught us about dignity, about holding our heads high even in the worst times. But Elizabeth, she taught us about family, about how love can exist in the shadows and still be deep and real." She walked to her purse, pulling out a creased photo. "This is the last picture we took together," she said, handing it to Michael. It was different from those he'd found in the hidden box. Elizabeth, Grace, and Emma at a picnic, all three laughing at something off camera. Sarah always said forgiveness is a gift we give ourselves, Grace went on, sitting again. She never resented William, never taught me to hate the Andersons. Some people aren't ready for a certain kind of love, she'd say. It's sadder for them than for us. Michael studied the photo in his hands, taking in the genuine joy on the three faces. My mother left a letter, he said eventually. She wanted me to find you, to bring our family into the light. Grace tensed again. Michael, I'm not here to force anything, he interjected gently. I'm here because I want to meet my aunt and my cousin. I want to understand this part of my mother's life she kept hidden for so long. I want to honor the legacy of love she built. A moment of silence stretched between them, broken only by the distant hum of the coffee machine and the muffled sounds of the hospital beyond the door. Emma asks about her every day, Grace said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. She doesn't fully understand. How could she? Elizabeth was her special aunt, the one who showed up with magical stories and hugs that made everything better. Elizabeth mentioned in her journal that Emma's condition was diagnosed right after Sarah passed, Michael said softly. Grace nodded, wiping tears from her face. It was like a perfect storm. Mum was gone so suddenly, then, 2 weeks later, Emma's diagnosis. I could barely process my grief before facing a new battle. She stood up again, unable to remain still, an anxious energy coursing through her. Doctors talked about complex surgeries, experimental treatments, astronomical costs. I am a nurse, so I understood enough to grasp the seriousness but not enough to feel in control. Then, like a miracle, Elizabeth appeared. She never mentioned helping with the treatments, Michael observed. Grace smiled sadly. No, she wouldn't. Elizabeth had a unique way of helping, always behind the scenes, always respecting our independence. It was only after a few months that I started noticing little miracles, appointments with specialists that usually took months to schedule, access to experimental treatments, even some hospital bills that mysteriously vanished. Michael could easily imagine his mother orchestrating all of that, using her influence and resources discreetly, always keeping Grace and Emma at the center of their own story. Sarah taught us about dignity, Grace continued, her voice stronger when she spoke of her mother. She worked as a maid by day and a waitress by night to give me a decent education. She never accepted a cent from William, never let our situation define who we were. We're rich in love, she'd say, and that's the only wealth that matters. Her words echoed Elizabeth's journal entries, those notes about Sarah's extraordinary strength and how it now lived on in Grace. Elizabeth understood that, Grace went on. She never tried to rescue us or treat us like a charity case. She just loved us, became the sister I never knew I needed, the Aunt Emma adored, the link to a family that always felt so distant and unreachable. Michael watched Grace as she spoke, noticing how her gestures, her way of talking, bore echoes of both Sarah and Elizabeth. It was as though these three women, mother, daughter, and sister, had woven an invisible tapestry of love and resilience that he was only now beginning to see. At the wake, he said softly, when I saw Emma with the daisy, there was something so familiar about that gesture. Now I know why. Grace smiled through her tears. Elizabeth and Emma had this ritual with daisies. Every time they met, no matter where, Emma had a daisy for her. It was their code, I guess, a way to say I love you without words. A quiet knock on the door interrupted them. A young nurse poked her head in. Sorry, Grace, but we need you in room 412. Grace nodded, quickly wiping her eyes. Turning to Michael, she hesitated before saying, Emma is in school right now, but maybe you'd like to meet her properly. She's been talking about Aunt Liz since the funeral, trying to understand in her own way. Michael felt his heart swell at the invitation. I'd love to, he replied sincerely. They exchanged phone numbers, and Grace scribbled an address on a slip of paper. Before leaving, she turned at the door one last time. Michael, thank you for coming, for understanding, for wanting to meet us. Elizabeth always said you shared her heart. Now I see she was right. After she left, Michael remained in the break room for a long time, absorbing everything he had learned. The mysterious girl at the wake, Emma, was no longer an enigma, but a living symbol of the secret love his mother had cultivated in the final years of her life. Elizabeth had found a way to unite two seemingly irreconcilable worlds, weaving a web of love and care that transcended social barriers and family secrets. Now it was up to him to continue that work, to honor that legacy of love and, perhaps, finally bring into the light what had long needed to remain in the shadows. The Anderson mansion seemed more imposing than ever under the stormy afternoon sky. Michael sat in his car for a few minutes, studying the Victorian facade that had been the backdrop for so many childhood memories. Now, every window, every architectural detail seemed heavy with the secrets he was about to confront. William Anderson kept a strict routine. At exactly 4 in the afternoon, he would invariably retreat to his study for a solitary drink, a habit Elizabeth used to mention with a mixture of irritation and concern. Michael knew he would find his grandfather there, in his leather armchair, gazing at the garden through the French windows. The current housekeeper, no longer Sarah, never again Sarah, greeted him with a polite smile. "Your grandfather is in his study, Mr. Michael." The hallway leading to the study felt endless. On the walls, family portraits observed his passage, generations of Andersons with austere gazes and dignified poses. Michael wondered if any of them had ever carried secrets as heavy as the one he was about to reveal. He knocked softly on the thick oak door. "Come in," William's deep voice called from inside. The study was exactly as Michael remembered. Dark wood paneling, shelves crammed with leather-bound books, the lingering scent of fine tobacco and aged whiskey. William sat in his favorite armchair, a half-finished glass of scotch on the side table. "Michael," his grandfather greeted him, though the smile never reached his eyes. "What a pleasant surprise." "We need to talk, Grandpa," Michael said, closing the door behind him. He noticed how William's hands tightened slightly on the chair, an almost imperceptible sign of tension. Of course. Care for a drink?" "No, thanks." Michael stayed on his feet, hands in his pockets where he clutched Sarah's photo he'd found in Elizabeth's box. "I'd like to talk about Sarah Matthews." The effect was immediate. Color drained from William's face, and his hand trembled as he reached for his scotch. "Sarah Matthews," he echoed, as if testing the name. "It's our old housekeeper. Grace's mother," Michael added, watching his grandfather closely. "My aunt." William stood up abruptly, walking to the window. His normally impeccable posture seemed to age decades in seconds. "Elizabeth told you," he said, not a question. "Through a letter after her death," Michael answered, his voice firm yet kind, "and through a journal. And a box of memories I found in her office." The silence that followed was heavy with 3 decades of unspoken truths. William remained with his back to him, silhouetted against the waning afternoon light. "It was so long ago," he finally said, his voice a whisper. "After your grandmother died, the house felt so empty, so silent. Sarah, she had a way of bringing light to the darkest places." Michael took the photo out of his pocket, placing it on the desk. William turned slowly, his eyes fixed on the image. "My God," he murmured, picking it up with trembling hands. "Where?" "Elizabeth kept it, along with photos of Grace and Emma." "Emma?" William's voice faltered. "So your granddaughter," Michael said softly. "The little girl at the wake in the blue dress with the daisy. She's 5 and has a rare heart condition." William staggered slightly, needing to steady himself against the desk. "At the wake, that child was—" "Yes, paying her last respects to Aunt Elizabeth, who secretly cared for her and Grace these last 5 years." William collapsed into his chair, still holding Sarah's photo. "Tell me everything," he asked, voice defeated. Michael settled into the chair opposite and began recounting all he had learned. Elizabeth's meeting Grace, the years of secret visits, the silent support for Emma's treatments, the deep bond that had formed among them. "Sarah died 6 months ago," Michael said gently, watching William close his eyes in anguish. "An aneurysm. It was sudden. She never had a chance to—" "Forgive me," William finished, his voice breaking. Not that I deserved her forgiveness. Grace said Sarah never spoke ill of you, Michael commented. She taught Grace that some people aren't ready for a certain kind of love. A sob escaped William's lips, a sound Michael never thought he'd hear from his always controlled grandfather. Sarah, she was extraordinary, kind, strong, dignified, even when I was a coward. What really happened, Grandpa? Michael asked softly. William drew a shaky breath, his fingers unconsciously stroking the photo of Sarah. Your grandmother had been gone for 2 years. The house felt like a mausoleum, cold, empty, haunted by memories. Elizabeth was away at college, rarely home. And Sarah, she was always there, with her gentle smile and quiet way of making everything better. He took a long sip of his scotch before continuing. It started innocently enough. Conversations over breakfast, moments in the garden. She loved caring for the flowers. Sarah had a way of listening that made you feel understood, accepted. And then one stormy night, the power went out. I found her in the kitchen, lighting candles. The light danced on her face, and she was so beautiful, so alive. William closed his eyes, lost in memory. It was the first time I kissed her. Michael watched emotions flicker across his grandfather's face, longing, guilt, regret. We fell in love, William continued in a low voice. Or rather, I admitted to myself I'd been in love with her for a while. For almost a year, we lived in our own bubble of happiness. Sarah never asked for anything, never demanded promises or changes. She simply loved. Until she found out she was pregnant, Michael supplied gently. William nodded, shame evident on his face. Panic consumed me. All I could think about was the scandal, what people would say, the damage to the family's reputation. I offered money, a lot of money, for her to disappear. She refused. Thank God she did, William said, tears streaming freely now. Sarah looked at me with such dignity. I don't need your money, Mr. Anderson, she said. I'm only sorry your fear is bigger than your love. Michael thought of Grace, how she bore that same quiet dignity and strength. She left the next morning, William continued, left only a note. Some people aren't ready for a certain kind of love. Our love for both of us. I never saw her again. And you never searched for her or Grace. William shook his head, remorse evident in every line of his face. Cowardly, I convinced myself it was better this way, that they were better off without the complication I represented. I buried myself in work, tried to forget, but you don't forget a love like that, do you? He looked again at the photo of Sarah, and now she's gone. Without my asking forgiveness, without my saying, I never stopped loving her. And Grace, my daughter, raised without a father because I was too weak to face my own fears. And Emma, Michael added gently. Your granddaughter, fighting a heart condition without ever knowing she has a grandfather who could... My God, William interrupted, his voice cracking. A heart condition? Which kind? How serious? Michael shared what he knew about Emma's condition, about how Elizabeth had quietly facilitated treatments and consultations. William listened intently, asking occasional questions about procedures and specialists. Elizabeth, William murmured, my Elizabeth, doing what I should have done, caring for them, loving them openly, without fear. It's not too late, Grandpa, Michael said softly. Grace and Emma are here. We can fix this. William stood up, walking to an old cigar box on his desk. With trembling hands, he opened it, revealing a small stack of yellowed newspaper clippings. I followed them through the papers, he confessed. Small mentions. Grace's graduation from nursing school, her first hospital job. I never had the courage to do more. Michael watched as his grandfather took out the clippings one by one, each piece of paper marking a moment in his daughter's life he had only observed from afar. Sarah is gone, William said finally, voice heavy with resolve. I can't change the past, can't get back the lost years, but Grace, Emma, maybe... They're your chance at redemption, Michael said gently. To honor the love Sarah had for you, to finally do the right thing. William nodded, wiping tears with the back of his hand, an uncharacteristically vulnerable gesture for such a composed man. How How do I even start? After all this time, after so much cowardice? With the truth, Michael replied. With humility. Grace has Sarah's heart. She understands forgiveness and second chances. But she'll need proof you're truly sorry and willing to change. William looked again at Sarah's photo, his fingers tracing the outline of the face he had loved and lost. I promise, he whispered, though it wasn't clear if he spoke to Michael, to Sarah, or to himself. I promise that this time I won't run away. This time, I'll love the way I should have from the start. The sun was setting as Michael finally left the mansion, casting long shadows across the garden where, so many years ago, Sarah and William had shared their brief moment of happiness. William remained in the study, photo of Sarah in one hand and a newspaper clipping in the other, finally facing the past he had tried so long to forget. Elizabeth's legacy of love continued to reveal its layers, now even touching the hardened heart of William Anderson. Michael knew the road ahead would be difficult, but there was hope. Hope that the broken fragments of his family could, at last, begin to mend. Margot's cafe had been carefully chosen by Michael. It was the same place where Elizabeth had first recognized Grace, a discreet spot with private tables and a warm atmosphere. That Saturday morning, the place was calm, with only a few scattered patrons enjoying their coffees. Michael arrived first, securing the most secluded table at the back. William showed up 15 minutes later, paler than usual in his impeccable suit, a small box wrapped in delicate blue paper, trembling in his hands. She confirmed she's coming, William asked, his voice betraying his anxiety. Michael nodded. Grace said she'd come, and she's bringing Emma. For a moment, William's face lit up before fear settled in. Do I deserve to meet them? Before Michael could respond, the cafe door swung open. Grace walked in, holding Emma's hand tightly. The little girl wore a blue dress, different from the one at the wake but equally charming, and her braids were accented with small white ribbons. Time seemed to freeze when Grace saw William. Her posture stiffened, and for a second, Michael feared she might turn around and leave. But then Emma tugged at her hand, pointing at the pastries in the display case, breaking the tense moment. Mr. Anderson, Grace greeted him formally once they reached the table, her voice controlled. Grace, William responded, standing up. His hands twitched uncertainly, as if he wanted to offer a handshake but then thought better of it. Thank you for coming. Emma looked curiously from one adult to the other, sensing the tension but not fully understanding it. Are you Aunt Liz's dad? She asked suddenly, surprising everyone. William swallowed hard before answering, Yes, I am. And you must be Emma. The girl smiled, a grin painfully reminiscent of Sarah. Mommy said you knew Grandma Sarah. Grace closed her eyes for a moment, as though the child's innocent question had physically struck her. William had to steady himself against the table. Yes, he managed. I knew your Grandma Sarah very well. They all sat, an uncomfortable silence hovering until the waitress came to take their orders. Emma wanted hot chocolate with marshmallows, making Grace smile a little. Elizabeth always ordered that for her. I brought something, William said once the waitress had left, sliding the blue box toward Emma. If your mother allows. Grace hesitated for a moment, then nodded. Emma unwrapped the present eagerly, revealing a delicate photo album. They're old photos, William explained softly, from when your Grandma Sarah worked in our home. Grace's first tears fell as she and Emma flipped through the album. There was Sarah, young and radiant, tending the garden, setting the table for tea, smiling for the camera in little everyday moments. Mommy had that same smile, Emma said, touching one of the photos reverently. Yes, she did, William agreed, his voice choked. Grace has that same smile too. Grace raised her eyes from the album, finally looking directly at William for the first time. Why? She asked simply, years of unanswered questions packed into that single word. Because I was a coward, William replied with brutal honesty. Because I let the fear of what others might think be stronger than the love I felt for your mother. There's no excuse for that. Only deep regret and a desire to fix at least a fraction of what I broke, if you'll let me. Emma, engrossed in the photographs, didn't notice the weight of the conversation above her head. Look, Mommy, Grandma Sarah is making cookies in this one. Grace smiled through tears. She made the best chocolate chip cookies in the world. She always said she learned the recipe in the Anderson kitchen. On rainy afternoons, William added softly. She turned grey days into magical moments with those cookies. Mom raised me alone, Grace said, her voice steady despite the tears. Worked 2, sometimes 3 jobs, but she always had the energy to tell me bedtime stories, to bake cookies on weekends, to teach me that dignity can't be bought. William hung his head, shame etched into his features. Sarah was extraordinary, and I threw away the chance to spend my life with her, to watch you grow, to be the father you deserved. She never let me feel your absence, Grace continued. She filled every role, mother, father, friend, teacher, on her own. And when she got sick, her voice faltered. It was so quick, she whispered. One day she was fine, the next. I didn't even get a proper goodbye. Sensing her mother's sadness, Emma put the album aside and hugged Grace. Don't cry, Mommy. Grandma Sarah is with Aunt Liz now, watching over us from the sky. The child's innocent remark hit them all with full force. William covered his face with his hands, his shoulders shaking with silent sobs. Are you sad too? Emma asked him, concern filling her small voice. Mommy says sometimes grown-ups cry because they keep a lot of love in their hearts. William lowered his hands, looking at his granddaughter through tearful eyes. Your mom is very wise, Emma. She's just like your grandma Sarah. Emma slid off her chair and, to everyone's surprise, walked over to William, offering him a hug. Don't be sad. You can be my new grandpa now, and I can tell you all the stories about Grandma Sarah that Mommy tells me. Grace choked back a sob, watching her daughter, so much like Sarah in her capacity to forgive, to see past pain, to the love that was possible. William returned Emma's hug gently, as though she were made of porcelain. I'd like that very much, Emma. If your mother will let me, I'd love to hear all about your Grandma Sarah. She liked daisies, Emma informed him solemnly, still in his arms. Just like Aunt Liz, and she could make her voice sound different for every character in a story. She always said love is like magic. The more you give, the more you have. Grace ran her hand over one of Sarah's photos in the album. She forgave you, you know, she said quietly to William. Years ago, when I asked about my father, she said some people carry so much fear they need a lifetime to learn how to love properly. She was wiser than I'll ever be, William replied, still holding Emma. But maybe it's not too late to learn. If you give me a chance, Grace, if you let me get to know you and Emma, be part of your lives in whatever way you think is right. Emma looked at her mother with pleading eyes. Can we, Mommy? I always wanted a grandpa to tell me stories. Grace looked at her daughter, so innocent, so open to love, and then at William, seeing for the first time not the man who abandoned her mother, but a man broken by his own fear, seeking redemption. Sarah taught us about forgiveness, she said finally, and Elizabeth showed us family can take many different forms. Maybe we can try one step at a time. Emma's smile lit up the entire cafe, and even Grace couldn't help a small smile as her daughter began immediately sharing stories with William about her collection of picture books, about how Sarah used to make different voices for each character, about how she was sure Grandma Sarah and Aunt Liz were making cookies in heaven together. Michael watched the scene with a full heart. There, in the cafe where Elizabeth had first recognized Grace, a new chapter was being written in the Anderson family story. It wasn't a happy ending. There was still much healing to do, many wounds to mend. But it was a beginning, and sometimes, as Sarah used to say, that's all love needs. The call came at 3:17 a.m. Michael woke to the shrill ring of his phone, Grace's name lighting up the screen like an omen. Emma? Grace's voice was tight with panic. She's not doing well, Michael. We're headed to the hospital. 15 minutes later, Michael burst through the doors of St. Mary's emergency department. He found Grace in the hallway, still in her pajamas under her coat, her face white as a sheet. Doctors and nurses moved around a small figure on a gurney, Emma, looking even tinier and more fragile than usual, hooked up to monitors that beeped ominously. What happened? Michael asked, catching Grace by the shoulders as she staggered. She woke up short of breath, Grace explained mechanically. her eyes glued to the door through which Emma had been wheeled. "I thought it was just another normal episode, but then she started turning blue and—" Her voice trailed off, and Michael held her as she trembled. "Mom would know what to do," Grace whispered against his shoulder. "She always did." The sound of hurried footsteps echoed down the corridor. William Anderson appeared like a storm, still adjusting his tie. "Where is she? How is she?" Grace pulled away from Michael's embrace, straightening automatically. The nurse in her took control. "They're running tests. Dr. Stevens is with her now." "Stevens?" William frowned. "No, we need Dr. Harrison. He's the best pediatric cardiologist in the country." "Dr. Harrison is at a conference in Boston," Grace said wearily. "Dr. Stevens knows Emma's case. He's perfectly capable." "I'll make some calls," William declared, already grabbing his phone. "Harrison can be here in a few hours if—" "Dad," Michael intervened gently, the word making William pause in his tracks. "Let the doctors do their job first. Emma is in good hands." Time crawled in the hospital corridor. Grace alternated between moments of calm professionalism, consulting the medical team in terms Michael barely understood, and moments of crushing vulnerability, when being a mother eclipsed being a nurse. William paced back and forth, making the occasional phone call in hushed tones, his expression growing tenser with each passing hour. Michael noticed how his grandfather sometimes hovered near Grace, as if wanting to offer comfort, but not knowing how. "Mom did the same thing," Grace said suddenly, breaking a long silence. "Pacing like that when she was worried?" William stopped mid-step. She used to wring her hands too," he asked hesitantly. "When she was nervous?" A small, sad smile appeared on Grace's face. "Yes. And she'd hum softly, the same lullaby every time." "Somewhere over the rainbow," William murmured. "She used to sing it to Elizabeth when she was little." "She sang it to me too," Grace replied softly. "And then to Emma." Her words were cut short by Dr. Stevens' arrival. Everyone stood instantly. "Emma is stable," the doctor said, and Grace released a shaky sigh of relief. "But the tests show we need to do the surgery sooner than planned." "Surgery?" William stepped forward, instinctively placing himself beside Grace. Dr. Stevens explained the technical details of the procedure, Grace nodding at intervals, her hand unconsciously resting on William's arm. "When?" she finally asked. "Ideally tomorrow morning," the doctor replied. "The sooner the better." "Do it," Grace interrupted firmly, "whatever it takes." "I'll make all the arrangements," Dr. Stevens assured, turning to leave. The silence that followed was heavy with unspoken fears. Michael watched as Grace seemed to shrink suddenly, looking younger and more vulnerable. "Can I see her?" William asked hesitantly. Grace nodded. "She'll like that. She's been asking about you." The small figure in the hospital bed looked tinier against the stark white sheets. Tubes and monitors surrounded Emma, but her face lit up with a tired smile when she saw the visitors. "Grandpa will," she mumbled sleepily, extending a little hand that William held as though it might break. "I'm here, sweetheart," he replied, his voice hoarse. "We're going to take care of you." "Tell me a story about Grandma Sarah?" Emma asked, her eyes already heavy with sleep. William glanced at Grace, who nodded slightly. "Well," he began, sitting on the edge of the bed, "your Grandma Sarah had a magical garden. It was full of white daisies, which she said were fallen stars." Michael watched from the doorway as William recounted the tale, Grace sitting on the other side of the bed, their hands joined over Emma's blanket. In that moment, the barriers of the past seemed temporarily erased, united by their love for the small girl in the hospital bed. The hours leading up to the surgery passed like years. Grace refused to leave Emma's side, except when forced by hospital staff. William used all his influence to ensure every detail was perfect, every needed specialist available. On the morning of the surgery, as they waited for Emma to be taken to the operating room, Grace finally broke down. "I wish Mom were here," she sobbed in Michael's arms. "She always knew what to say, how to make everything feel okay." "She is here," William said softly, surprising them both. "In your smile, in the strength you're showing, in the love you have for Emma. Sarah lives on in you, Grace. She'd be so proud of the woman you've become." Grace looked at her father with tear-filled eyes, for the first time seeing a man who, despite his mistakes, had truly loved Sarah. "Emma has her eyes," Grace whispered. "Sometimes, when she smiles, it's like seeing Mom all over again." "And the same strength," William added. "The same knack for making everyone around her fall in love with her instantly." Michael observed the moment of shared understanding between father and daughter, united by their love for Sarah and Emma, by their fear of losing yet another person they loved. When the doctors came to take Emma for surgery, the little family huddled in a makeshift embrace. Grace kissed her daughter's forehead. William gripped her tiny hand one last time, and Michael offered a silent prayer, asking Elizabeth and Sarah to watch over their little warrior. Now all they could do was wait, and wait together. The private waiting room had become a silent battlefield. Robert and Ann Anderson had arrived minutes after hearing about Emma's surgery, not out of concern for a niece they didn't know existed, but at William's urgent request. The silence that followed the revelation was deafening. "This is absurd," Robert said first, his voice icy. "A housekeeper?" "Really, Father?" Anne remained seated, stiff in her grey suit, her eyes fixed on Grace as though she were a personal affront to their mother's memory. "Did Elizabeth know?" Anne asked at last, her voice trembling. "This whole time, my own sister." "Elizabeth didn't just know," Michael intervened firmly. "She actively sought Grace and Emma out, built a relationship with them, loved them as family because that's what they are." "Family," Robert let out a bitter laugh. "A bastard child and her sick kid. That's what you call family." "Robert," William thundered, rising from his seat. "You will not speak about my daughter and granddaughter that way." The silence that fell was absolute. Grace, who had been quiet until then, finally spoke. "My mother always said that character isn't measured by titles or possessions." Her voice was soft yet firm. "She worked as a housekeeper by day and a waitress by night to put me through school. She never accepted a cent beyond her salary, never asked for anything, never used my existence as leverage." She stood slowly, years of quiet dignity emanating from every motion. Sarah Matthews was an extraordinary woman. She raised a daughter alone, worked honestly, and still found the strength to teach me about love and forgiveness. You know what she said whenever I asked about my father. "Some people carry so much fear they forget how to love. We should pity them, not hate them." Anne blinked rapidly, unshed tears shining in her eyes. Robert remained standing, but something in his posture had changed. "Elizabeth met Grace by chance," Michael continued. "Unlike you, she saw past the prejudice and pride. She saw a sister who deserved to be loved, a niece who needed an aunt. She built bridges while you build walls." "What about inheritance?" Robert spat. "Isn't that what you want? A share of the Anderson fortune?" Grace went pale as though slapped. "My daughter is in surgery at this very moment." Her voice shook with contained emotion. "A surgery I'm paying for with my nurse's salary. I've never asked the Andersons for anything, never wanted anything except recognition of my mother's existence as a worthy human being." William stepped forward, standing beside Grace. "Sarah deserved far more than mere respect," he said. "She deserved my open love, my protection, my support, and I failed her. I failed because of fear, cowardice, and worry about appearances and reputation. I won't fail Grace and Emma. Not anymore." "You've lost your mind," Robert accused. This woman shows up out of nowhere with a convenient story about some old housekeeper. And you—" "I have proof," Michael interrupted, taking Elizabeth's journal and the memory box from his bag. "Photos, letters, documents, but most importantly, Elizabeth's own account. Our Elizabeth, who spent her final years fixing the family's mistake in turning its back on Grace and Sarah." Anne picked up one of the photos with trembling hands. A young Sarah, smiling in the Anderson garden. "I remember her," she whispered. "She made cookies on rainy afternoons. She always had a gentle smile, a kind word. She kept that kindness until the end," Grace said softly. "Even when the aneurysm took her so suddenly, her last gesture was a smile. And you know what's most ironic? We lost her right when Emma's initial diagnosis came. Elizabeth appeared soon after, like the universe knew we needed a guardian angel." William wept openly now, decades of remorse finally overflowing. "I loved her," he confessed, voice ragged. I loved Sarah with all my heart, but I let my fear overshadow that love. And now she's gone without me ever saying—" "She knew," Grace interrupted gently. "Somehow she always knew. True love doesn't need words," she'd say. "It exists in the silence between moments, in the choices we make, in the lives we touch." Robert opened his mouth to argue again, but Anne stopped him with a gesture. "Look at her, Robert," she said quietly. "Really look. She has Sarah's eyes. That same quiet dignity. It's like seeing a ghost." The silence that followed was broken by the door swinging open. A nurse entered, locking eyes with Grace. "The surgery is over," she announced. "Emma's stable. She's asking for her mom, and for Grandpa Will." Grace nearly collapsed with relief, and William instinctively supported her. For a moment, father and daughter leaned on each other, united by love for the little girl fighting for her life a few floors above. "Go," Michael said gently. "I'll handle things here." As Grace and William rushed off to see Emma, Michael turned to his aunt and uncle. "Elizabeth left a letter," he said, pulling the worn envelope from his pocket. "Her final words to the family. It might be time you read it." Anne took the letter with trembling fingers, Robert reading over her shoulder. Elizabeth's words, written with so much love and hope, filled the room's silence. "Family is more than blood," Anne read aloud, tears rolling freely down her face. "It's choice, it's love, it's forgiveness. Grace and Emma are ours. Sarah was ours. Our only sin was denying it for so long." Robert moved away, walking to the window. His rigid posture began to crumble. "Liz was always the best of us," he murmured. "The bravest, the most compassionate. We can still honor her memory," Michael said softly. "We can still make the right choice. Grace doesn't want your money or your status. She wants what Sarah always wanted: dignity, respect, and the chance for her daughter to know her family." Anne stood abruptly. "I want to see my niece," she declared. "I want to meet the little girl Elizabeth loved so much." Robert remained silent for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "Elizabeth would never have done anything to hurt this family," he said at last. "If she trusted them, if she loved them." Michael watched his aunt and uncle head to the pediatric ICU, where Emma was recovering. Elizabeth's legacy of love continued its work, breaking down barriers, healing old wounds, uniting what had been broken. Somewhere, he imagined, Elizabeth and Sarah were smiling. The Anderson Mansion's library was as quiet as a cathedral. Late afternoon light filtered through the stained glass windows, painting colorful patterns on the Persian rug where generations of Andersons had walked. William had called a full family meeting, something that hadn't happened since Elizabeth's funeral. Michael observed his grandfather standing by the fireplace, one hand resting on the marble mantel. Grace sat in an armchair nearby, Emma asleep in her lap, still recovering from surgery. Robert and Anne occupied the sofa, their faces tense but no longer openly hostile. George Williams, the family lawyer, quietly arranged some documents on the mahogany table. "Thank you all for coming," William began, his voice steady despite the emotion in his eyes. "Recent events, significant ones, have forced me to face mistakes I made long ago." He approached Grace, stopping beside her chair. "This is my daughter," he announced, placing a gentle hand on her shoulder. "Grace Matthews Anderson, daughter of Sarah Matthews, a woman I loved deeply and with whom I failed terribly." Robert shifted uncomfortably in his seat but remained silent. Anne's gaze was fixed on Emma, sleeping in Grace's lap. "And this," William continued, his voice softening as he looked at his granddaughter, "is Emma, my granddaughter, whom we nearly lost this week. A child who inherited not only Sarah's beauty, but also her extraordinary strength." George Williams cleared his throat politely, handing William several documents. William accepted them with steady hands. "I spent the morning with my attorneys," he announced, "revising my will and other legal documents. Grace will be officially recognized as my daughter, with all the rights and privileges that entails. Emma will be included as my legitimate granddaughter." "Father!" Robert shot to his feet. "You can't be serious!" "I've never been more serious in my life," William replied calmly. "For 30 years, I let fear and pride keep me from doing what was right. I lost Sarah without ever asking her forgiveness. I lost the chance to watch Grace grow up. I nearly lost Emma before she ever knew she had a grandfather. I refuse to lose anything else because I'm worried about what people might say." Grace went pale, adjusting Emma in her arms. "William, I never asked for this. I never wanted." "I know," he interrupted gently. "And that's exactly why I need to do it. Sarah raised you with such dignity, such character. You've never sought money or status. But this is your right, Grace. Emma's right." Anne stood slowly, walking over to the window. "Elizabeth knew," she said quietly. "All this time, she knew and tried to fix things in her own way. Elizabeth was braver than all of us put together," William agreed. "She saw beyond prejudice, beyond appearances. She saw a family where we only saw scandal." George Williams stepped forward with another set of documents. "These papers are ready," he informed them. "We just need the signatures." Robert watched the scene with a mixture of disbelief and resignation. "This will cause a massive scandal," he muttered. "Let it," William said firmly. "I've lost too much already worrying about scandals." Emma stirred in Grace's lap, her eyes fluttering open sleepily. "Grandpa Will," she murmured. William's face lit up in a smile that transformed his features. "I'm here, sweetheart." "Tell me another story about Grandma Sarah." Emotion filled the room. Anne covered her mouth with one hand, tears streaming down her cheeks. Even Robert looked shaken by the child's innocent request. "Of course," William managed, his voice rough with emotion. "How about the one where your Grandma Sarah turned rainy days into magical adventures with her special cookies?" Grace watched them interact, silent tears tracking down her face. Michael stepped closer, placing a supportive hand on her shoulder. "Ms. Matthews, pardon, Ms. Anderson," George Williams interrupted gently. "We'll need your signature on a few papers." Grace looked down at the documents, then at William, who nodded encouragingly. With trembling hands, she signed where indicated, officially accepting her place in the Anderson family. "There's one more thing," William said, pulling a small velvet box from his pocket. Inside was a ring bearing the family crest. "It belonged to your mother. Sarah wore it on a chain, hidden under her clothes. I found it among her belongings after she left. I never had the courage to do anything with it. Now it belongs to you." Grace took the ring reverently, recognizing it instantly. "I remember her touching something at her neck when she was deep in thought," she said softly. "I never knew what it was." "She never stopped loving you," Grace went on after a moment, looking at William. "Even after everything. True love forgives," she always said. "Even when it can't forget." William knelt beside Grace's chair, bringing himself level with her eyes. "I don't deserve your forgiveness or Sarah's, but I promise, for the rest of my days, I'll try to be the father you deserved and the grandfather Emma deserves." Emma, now more awake, watched the scene with a child's curiosity. "Why is everyone crying?" she asked innocently. Anne let out a choked laugh. "Sometimes, sweet girl, when your heart is very full of love, it spills out through your eyes." Robert, who had remained silent, finally stepped forward. "If Elizabeth trusted you," he said slowly, "if she saw in you what we're seeing now, then maybe I was wrong to judge so quickly." Grace regarded him with the same gentle eyes as Sarah. "Mom always said family is like a garden. It needs time, patience, and plenty of love to grow." William smiled through his tears. "Sarah and her garden metaphors," he said fondly. "She turned everything into poetry." The sun began to set, casting golden shadows through the stained glass windows. In that ancient library, watched over by portraits of past Anderson generations, a new chapter in the family's story was being written. It wasn't a happy ending. There was still much to heal, much to rebuild, but it was a beginning, a gesture of redemption that would echo through future generations. Emma, curled in her mother's arms, yawned and nestled closer. In her sleep, she smiled, the same gentle smile Sarah had, the same one that had won William's heart so many years before, the same one that now, through Grace, was helping mend old wounds and build new bridges. Emma's recovery brought with it a subtle shift in the Anderson family dynamic. The old music room in the mansion, silent for so long, now echoed with childish laughter and hushed conversation. William had insisted that Grace and Emma stay at the mansion during Emma's convalescence, and to everyone's surprise, Grace had agreed. One particularly golden afternoon, William found Grace in the garden, seated on the same bench Sarah used to occupy on her breaks. Emma was nearby, looking healthier by the day, surrounded by white daisies William had specially planted for her. Sarah loved this place, William said quietly, sitting beside Grace. She said she could hear the universe's music here. Grace smiled, a smile pure Sarah. She never lost her love for gardens. Our little house had the prettiest yard on the street, even though it was tiny. A piece of heaven on earth, she'd call it. Tell me more, William requested, his voice barely above a whisper. Please. Grace pulled a worn notebook from her bag, its pages yellowed with age. I found her journal after she was gone. I never had the courage to read it on my own. William gazed at the notebook as though it were sacred. Emma, sensing something important was happening, quietly approached and settled at her mother's feet. Dear Diary, Grace began reading, her voice trembling slightly. Today, William smiled at me in the garden. Not the polite smile of an employer to a housekeeper, but a real smile that reached his eyes. For a moment, all social barriers faded, and we were just two people sharing the beauty of a blooming garden. Sarah's words filled the afternoon, bringing her back to life through her gentle observations and silent wisdom. William wept openly now, each line reminding him of the love he had let slip away. In the kitchen, Michael was getting dinner ready. Anne had arrived early to help, her initial resistance to Grace melting away more each day. Even Robert, still reserved, had accepted the invitation. Elizabeth would love this, Anne remarked, placing flowers in a vase, white daisies, of course. She was always the one who tried hardest to keep the family together. Dinner was served in the old dining room, where portraits of generations of Andersons looked down on the unusual scene unfolding. Emma had insisted on sitting between William and Grace, her innocent presence smoothing any lingering tensions. Remember, Michael began, raising his glass, those Sunday dinners Elizabeth used to organize. She always said that family is built around a table. And those cookies Sarah made, Anne added softly, surprising everyone, on rainy afternoons. The smell filled the whole house. Grace smiled, tears shining in her eyes. She never lost her touch, even at the end. Her cookies were magic. Emma and I used to bake them with her every Sunday. I still have the recipe, Emma announced proudly. Grandma Sarah taught me before she went to live with the angels. William cleared his throat, visibly moved. Maybe we can bake them together one day in her memory, Emma beamed. Can I wear her special apron? Mommy saved it. She saved a lot of things, Grace said, placing Sarah's journal on the table, including stories we all need to hear. Over the next few hours, between plates of food and glasses of wine, Sarah's journal was shared. Her words wove a tapestry of love, loss, dignity, and hope. Through those pages, the family discovered a Sarah few had truly known, a woman of deep wisdom and unconditional love. I can't teach Grace to hate, Grace read from one especially poignant entry. Hate is too heavy a burden for a heart to carry. So I teach her dignity, love that persists even when it's not returned, forgiveness that frees the forgiver most of all. Robert Hand, who'd been mostly silent, finally spoke. Elizabeth was right, he said quietly, about everything, about you. Mom always said Elizabeth was an angel in disguise, Emma commented, rubbing sleep from her eyes. Now she's a real angel with Grandma Sarah. Anne let out a soft sob, and even Robert seemed moved. William took Emma's small hand in his, placing his other hand over Grace's. Sarah and Elizabeth, he said, his voice thick with emotion. Two extraordinary women who showed us the true meaning of family. Through their love, even after they're gone, we're finally becoming the family we should have been. Michael observed the scene with a full heart. Elizabeth's final wish was coming true, not through legal documents or formal announcements, but through these shared moments, these exchanged stories, this love finally allowed to flourish. Grace turned another page of Sarah's journal. She wrote something here, she said softly, just before the end. True love is like a daisy, simple, resilient, able to bloom in the unlikeliest places. It doesn't need luxury or status to grow. only a little light and the determination to persist. Emma, fighting off sleep, mumbled, "Is that why Aunt Liz loved daisies too?" "Yes, sweetheart," Grace answered, gently stroking her daughter's hair. "That's why we'll keep planting daisies, to remember Sarah and Elizabeth's love, the love that brought us all here tonight." The evening wore on with more stories and memories, more bridges built between past and present. When Emma finally fell asleep in William's arms, her small body trusting and at ease, there wasn't a dry eye at the table. The Anderson family was changing, growing, healing, not through grand gestures or dramatic declarations, but through these quiet moments of connection, these shared stories, this love that, like Sarah's daisies, found the strength to bloom even in the most improbable places. The Anderson mansion's garden had never looked lovelier. 6 months of careful attention had transformed it into a sea of white daisies, their petals dancing in the gentle autumn breeze. White chairs, arranged in a semicircle, created an intimate setting, while silk ribbons fluttered among the century-old trees. Michael stood by the garden entrance, watching the guests arrive. They were few, only those closest to the family, personally invited, but each presence carried its own weight. Robert and Anne had arrived early, helping with final details in a way that would have made Elizabeth smile. In Elizabeth's old room, now a welcoming space for Grace and Emma, William Anderson adjusted his tie for what felt like the 10th time, his hands trembling slightly. "It's perfect, Dad," Grace said softly. The word Dad still new on her lips, but sounding more natural each day. William turned, eyes welling up at the sight of Grace in her pale blue dress, the same shade Sarah used to favor. Emma, a smaller reflection of her mother, spun in her own dress, white daisies woven into her braids. "You both look beautiful," he managed, voice unsteady. Sarah would be so proud." "She is," Emma declared, with the unshakable certainty of childhood. "She and Aunt Liz are watching from heaven. Mommy told me." Grace smiled through tears, tucking a loose strand of Emma's hair back into place. "Yes, they are, sweetheart, and they're smiling." The garden was already filling with people when they stepped outside. Michael had orchestrated everything meticulously, honoring both Anderson traditions and the simplicity Sarah had always loved. White daisies lined the path to a small stage where William would make his announcement. William climbed the steps, Grace and Emma by his side. The late afternoon sun cast a golden halo around them, as though the sky itself was blessing the moment. "Friends, family," William began, his voice strong and clear. "Thank you for coming on this significant day. Some of you may wonder why I've asked you here, in the same garden where, 30 years ago, I committed the greatest mistake of my life." An absolute hush fell over the gathering. Grace held Emma's hand, giving it a gentle squeeze. "In this garden," William continued, "I loved an extraordinary woman named Sarah Matthews, and in this same garden, out of fear and cowardice, I drove her away when she needed me most. Today, 30 years later, I'm here to set that right." He turned to Grace, tears now streaming down his face. "This is my daughter, Grace Matthews Anderson. For 3 decades, I denied her birthright, not out of lack of love, but out of an excess of fear. Today, in front of all of you, I acknowledge her not just legally, but with all my heart, as my beloved daughter." Soft murmurs rippled through the seated guests, but William kept speaking. "And this little light," he smiled at Emma, who beamed back at him, "is my granddaughter, Emma. Through her, I have a chance to experience the unconditional love Sarah always had, the wisdom Elizabeth embodied, and the resilience Grace carries." Robert and Anne, seated in the front row, held hands, tears silently rolling down their cheeks. Michael noticed Anne's face light up each time Emma glanced her way, a sign his aunt was finally embracing the niece Elizabeth had always known she could love. "I've made many mistakes," William said. "I let fear of what others would think overshadow my love. I lost precious years that could have been filled with laughter, shared stories, and treasured memories. But Sarah, in her infinite wisdom, taught Grace about forgiveness. Elizabeth, my dear Elizabeth, built bridges when I only knew how to build walls." He clasped Grace's hand, drawing her closer. I can't change the past. I can't bring Sarah back or thank Elizabeth personally for her love and courage. But from this day forward, I can be the father Grace deserves, the grandfather Emma needs, the man Sarah always believed I could be. Unable to hold back any longer, Emma wrapped her arms around her grandfather's leg, her spontaneity eliciting emotional smiles from the crowd. After the ceremony, as the guests mingled at a small reception, the newly complete Anderson family made one more important stop. The cemetery lay only a few minutes from the mansion, a peaceful place where Elizabeth and Sarah now rested side by side, as William had insisted. Emma walked ahead, her blue dress fluttering among the tombstones, clutching a bouquet of white daisies. She stopped first at Elizabeth's grave, placing half the flowers there. "Thank you for loving us, Aunt Liz," she said simply. "I promise to take care of Grandpa Will and make him smile a lot." At Sarah's grave, she left the remaining daisies. "Grandma Sarah, Mommy's happy now, and Grandpa Will is too. You were right about love being stronger than fear." William hugged Grace, the two of them watching Emma with tearful eyes. Robert and Anne approached, each holding their own small bunch of daisies to lay down. "Elizabeth was right," Anne whispered, "about everything." "Sarah was right too," Robert added, surprising them all. "About forgiveness being a gift we give ourselves." Michael looked on, his heart full. His mother's final wish had been fulfilled in ways even she couldn't have foreseen. The Anderson family was no longer just a name or an inheritance. It was a living testament to the power of love and forgiveness. As they left the cemetery, William held Emma's hand in one of his and Grace's in the other. The sun was dipping below the horizon, painting the sky in pink and gold, Sarah's favorite colors. "Where are we going now, Grandpa?" Emma asked, skipping happily between steps. William smiled, looking first at his granddaughter, then at his daughter. "Home, my dear." "We're all going home." Michael lingered momentarily, watching the three of them walk away hand in hand. On Elizabeth's grave, a single white daisy swayed softly in the breeze as if his mother was smiling, satisfied to see her final and greatest wish fulfilled. A family united not by obligation or tradition, but by love, understanding, and forgiveness. Sarah's and Elizabeth's legacies lived on now through Grace and Emma, through William finally learning to love without fear, through Robert and Anne opening their hearts to a new definition of family. And so, amid white daisies and cherished memories, the Anderson family began its next chapter, at last complete, at last at peace,